everyone, welcome to Elvis Presley Past, Present and Future, where we are continuing on with our Elvis journey. Let us continue with our next adventure. Elvis was a frequent visitor to the Tower Theatre. It was not only showing German movies, but also the newest American movies in their original language. Elvis enjoyed visiting the cinema up to 3 times a week. He and his friends Rex Mansfield and Johnny Lange will always arrive 10 minutes late, and so they wouldn't cause a stir. They left a few minutes before the end of the movie. It was the same on November 20, when Elvis, with Rex Mansfield and Johnny Lange, again went to the movies. This night, he met 19-year-old Elizabeth Claudia Stefaniak, whose German father had been reported missing during World War II, only to turn up years later with a Russian wife. After an acrimonious divorce, Elizabeth's mother had married an American Army sergeant, Raymond McCormick, also stationed in Germany. Forbidden by her stepfather to date any GI, and unable to get a job because, although German born to a German mother, technically she was an American. Johnny Lange, another GI and a friend of Elvis, indirectly introduced Elizabeth to Elvis. But this was no accident. In fact, Elizabeth had read about Elvis's arrival in the Stars and Stripes newspaper, and as a genuine Elvis fan, decided to waylay him at the cinema and try for his autograph. At first she had no luck, because Elvis and his friends always arrived in the cinema 10 minutes late. Eventually she spotted him in the audience. When Johnny Lange got up to purchase some popcorn, Elizabeth gave him a piece of paper and begged him to ask Elvis for his autograph. When he returned to his seat, he whispered a few words to Elvis, and Rex Mansfield got up, and he approached Elizabeth and told her that Elvis wanted to sit beside her. Completely captivated, Elizabeth thought that Elvis up close was the most beautiful hunk of a man that she had ever seen. This maybe explains why she didn't resist when he boldly put his arm around her and asked her name. Elizabeth recalls, "Here I was sitting with the most famous GI in the world as he held my hand and whispered sweet nothings in my ear. Needless to say, I was floating on cloud 9. That night, November 20, 1958, will be forever attached to my mind. That night, when he walked me home, it was only a 10-minute walk. I wondered if I would ever see him again. But I did. For the next 6 weeks, I met Elvis at the theatre, and he would walk me home. In the following weeks, Elizabeth and Elvis were seeing each other up to 3 to 4 times a week, mostly to go to the movies and enjoy that 10-minute walk back to her home. Elvis then started dropping by at the McCormick's house on a regular basis. His first unexpected visit at Elizabeth's parents' home was a surprise. Elizabeth and her mother were out, and when they arrived home, they found about 25 kids gathered outside the house. Slipping inside, they learnt from Elizabeth's 6-year-old sister, Linda, that her not recognising Elvis, she had refused to let him in, as her father was sleeping. A kindly neighbour, having overheard the doorstep exchange, invited Elvis to wait in his house instead. When visiting the family, Elvis often played guitar and sang for them. He also talked a lot of his family, particularly his mother, revealing that he still missed her desperately, often crying when he mentioned her name. On November 27, 1958, Elvis was promoted to Private First Class Company Commander Captain Edward E. Betts, congratulating him for his new rank. With this bump in rank came a pay increase from $85.80 to $99.37 a month. Elvis' strong family ties were also emphasised by the fact that when he phoned his father back in Bad Nauheim every day, Vernon also came to visit him. The two were close. One of Elvis's superiors recommended the Mickey Bar under the GI's dance hall was where Elvis could stay with his father when he visited. In addition to artists and striptease dancers and bands from all over Europe, a lot of people knew this place and a lot of artists performed there. The owner of the bar promises Elvis to secretly quarter his father and himself in the guest house of the bar. There Elvis and his dad, Vernon, stayed anonymously for 4 days. Supposedly, Elvis let his hips rotate on only 3 occasions outside of the United States throughout his career. In 1957, he sang in Toronto, Ottawa, and Vancouver. But there's another appearance that officially did not exist. It was in 1958, in that small dance hall called the Mickey Bar. The concert took place on a small scale and was kept secret for reasons. Elvis had very strict contracts and was not allowed to perform during his time in the army. Schnitzel with fried potatoes. That was Elvis's favourite dish, remembers Raymond Rodler, the owner of the Mickey Bar. Almost a week he was here. Then, when his father left, Elvis wanted to settle the bill, but the bill was waived off. He asked my wife to gather the staff together, and he sat down at the grand piano in the bar. He played all his hits for 2.5 hours, said Rodler. The condition was that the restaurant had to be closed. No photos were to be taken. It was forbidden for him to give concerts during this time. The appearance in Mickey's Bar remained his only offence and became legendary. My mother made Elvis a schnitzel every day, he said. On his last day in the bar, it was between the 12th and the 20th of December, Elvis said to my mother he wanted to surprise the staff, but please, no photos, no recording equipment, and no strangers. Otherwise, I will have problems. In the afternoon around 4 p.m, the doors were all locked. All the 35 waitresses, cooks, and bar people knew what they should wear. They were told, dress a little bit fine. As Elvis, in civilian clothes, came down the stairs and sat down at the piano, not even the bar staff knew that Elvis had lived in the guest room for 4 days. Elvis sang without a microphone almost all of his hits. These were nice hours. Between the songs, Elvis, the world star, talks to the staff. His audience enjoyed 2 hours without screeching and fainting. On December 20, the day of his return to Friedberg, he dropped in on Elizabeth Stefanik and her parents to say goodbye. During the course of this visit, he informed them that he needed a secretary back in Bad Nauheim to act as interpreter and deal with his many bags of fan mail. Her parents agreed, and soon their daughter was on her way to Bad Nauheim to live with Elvis, his father, his grandmother, Red West, and Lamar Fike. Initially, Elizabeth stayed in a room at the Hotel Grunwald, where Elvis and his entourage were still in residence. After his return from Grafenoir, Elvis was awarded a 3-day pass for excelling at manoeuvres. He celebrated by purchasing a white BMW, a demonstration model. He purchased this on December 21. The purchase was arranged as a promotional ploy by the Bavarian Motor Works of Munich through BMW Glockel in Frankfurt. Elvis used the car to commute to and from base and enjoyed it enough to ship it back to the US in 1960 after returning home from his army service. By the time it arrived in the USA, it was red. The reason behind the colour change was because Elvis had it painted due to the fact that it was being used as a canvas for his many devotees to express their love with lipstick. It changed hands a couple more times before ending up with space engineer and car collector Jack Castor, who stored it in a warehouse near San Francisco, where it sat for decades waiting in vain for restoration. Castor knew he had former hands-stuck race car and had heard rumours that it had belonged to Elvis. He said, "It took some time until we actually got the engine compartment open and identified the stamped chassis number 70079, the holy grail among BMW numbers." The discovery supported the theory that the red 507 was indeed the same white car that Elvis drove around Germany. The instrument panel was newly cast as per the original, and the leather upholstery was created to precisely match the pattern shown in old photographs and catalogues. Right now, the Elvis 507 is back home in Germany and sits at the BMW Museum in Munich. On the payday before Christmas, it was customary for the first sergeants to set up a collection booth for gifts for orphans in nearby Friedberg. There was no pressure for donation. The soldiers knew they could donate anonymously, and no one would ever know how much they gave or even who had given it. Elvis went into the booth and put down his contribution. It was suspected he had made a sizable contribution, because this Christmas the total collected by the headquarters was far larger than in past years. The first sergeant appointed a committee to buy presents for the orphans. As usual, Elvis was right there in the middle of things. The last day of work before the holiday season was hectic. There was the orphanage party and 1,000 details relating to it. There was the decoration of the company area for visitors. The reconnaissance platoon was selected to decorate the company Christmas tree, which was placed in the centre of the day room. That morning, and Captain Betts disappeared. They'd gone to visit each of the orphanages in the area. The program to administer the new Sake polio vaccine was just starting in the area, and Elvis had volunteered to lend his name to the drive. Elvis's chief, Sergeant Ira Jones, recalls, later, when all the work was done, the soldiers held a small jam session. They were humming and singing Christmas songs. Elvis was asked if he could sing a few Christmas songs for them, and he did. He started with a rock version of White Christmas. One of the soldiers who was going to leave asked Elvis, "Elvis, before I go, would you sing Silent Night?" And Elvis took a guitar and started to sing. Those walking past didn't interrupt. They simply walked silently by Elvis, touching his shoulder before they walked out the door. No word was spoken after the song, until Elvis broke the silence. "Merry Christmas, everyone," he said. And "Merry Christmas, Elvis," they replied in unison. It was Elvis's first Christmas far from home. As a Christmas gift, Vernon presented Elvis with a guitar. It was the German brand Isana. The guitar is covered with black piano lacquer. and was already bought by Vernon on the 20th of the 12th, 1958, in the Music House Hummel in Frankfurt for 225 German marks. On Christmas Day, Elvis went to Frankfurt to attend the Holiday on Ice show. In contrast to the Bill Haley concert, the moderate audience allowed Elvis to watch the show in the auditorium. He had become friendly with several skaters and paid them a visit backstage. Elvis had always had a big heart for children, especially those who had been affected by illness. Before he drove to Frankfurt, he made sure that a group of deaf children could meet him. The caregiver, Mrs. Davis, recalls, Elvis was a warm-hearted and thoughtful young man. He came bounding out of the front door of his home, looking handsome in a dark suit and white shirt. He kissed the girls on the cheek, and they stood there like rag dolls, vowing never to wash their faces again. He shook hands and thanked us for bringing the children to see him. On New Year's Eve, 1958, snow fell overnight, and Elvis took the occasion for a snowball fight with Red West and Lamar Fike in front of the Hotel Greenworld. They had a lot of fun in the snow. Having already moulded a giant snowball, Elvis had the look in his eye of someone who was already determined who was going to be the recipient of his frosty projectile. On January 8, he celebrated his 24th birthday. He got a load of congratulation letters from fans all over the world. On January 16, 1959, blood donation action took place in the Wharton Barracks in Friedberg. Elvis and about 178 of his soldier comrades participated in this, which of course was accompanied by the press. Elvis donated 380 cubic centimetres of blood for the German Red Cross. The other 178 GIs who also donated blood that day received, understandably, not as much attention. After the photos were published, the youth magazine Bravo reported that readers had asked where could they buy the blood of Elvis to have it injected into their own veins. Oh dear. The Confidential magazine invites Elvis to a photo session in Frankfurt with the March of Dimes poster child, Robert Marquette. Before leaving, Elvis wrote the following for Robert on a wooden wall clock. He wrote, "Do not stop the time. Just catch a moment and hold it tight. My best wishes for you, your friend Elvis, 1959. Elvis and his entourage liked the Germans enormously, finding them refreshingly honest and good-natured. Unfortunately, the antics of the young Americans would lead to conflicts with the manager of the hotel. Because Father Presley and the bodyguards consumed immense amounts of alcohol and also lured one or two ladies to the hotel rooms, the Presleys were soon intolerable. In addition, press and fans besieged the hotel, which severely hampered hotel's operations. The hotel owner finally loses his temper and asks Elvis to move on somewhere else. Consequently, after returning from manoeuvres in Grafenoir, Elvis started looking for a house to rent. Elvis gave his poodle, Cherry, to owner Mr. Schmidt. The reason was the dog was used to the Hotel Grünwald and the staff. Mr. Schmidt later gave the poodle to his cook, Mrs. Reinhardt. Searching for a house was not easy. This problem was the locals had heard stories about how Elvis and his clan had been forced to leave to hotels previously because of their wild behaviour. However, the shrewd Mrs. Piper realised that renting to the rich Americans would provide her with a handsome income. Because Elvis was famous, he was compelled to pay $800 a month, about 4 or 5 times the going rate, for just the privilege of living in her house. The house certainly didn't warrant that kind of rental. It was a modest 3-storied 4-bedroom white painted building in poor state of repair. On February 3, 1959, Elvis and his family and friends leave the hotel and move to the Growth Street number 14 in Bad Nauheim, a villa that is rented to Elvis by the owner, Maria Piper. The main entrance to the house was through a side door, which led to a small vestibule, where there was a space to hang coats. A frosted glass door led to the main living room. The modestly furnished room ran the whole length of the front of the building, with doors leading off to the kitchen and bathroom. In the far corner of the room stood a rented piano, which Elvis had rented, where he and the others would gather in the evening. A staircase led to an upper hallway and the 4 bedrooms, with Elvis and Vernon occupying the 2 at the back, and Minnie May one of the front rooms, while Red, West, and Lamar shared the other. The staircase then continued up to Mrs. Piper's attic room. Mrs. Piper, who insisted on remaining in the house, shared the kitchen with the exasperated Minnie May, Elvis's grandma. One thing that Minnie May and Mrs. Piper had in common was their fondness for alcohol. Minnie May loved miniatures, which she would hide in her pockets, as Elvis, a non-drinker, did not approve. Both women were often seen together having coffee and cognac in the local cafes. Drinking was a habit that Minnie May shared with her son Vernon and Elvis's mother Gladys. Minnie May's relationship with Mrs. Piper was a mixture of antagonism and affection. They fought over the kitchen. They fought over the running of the house and the rowdy behaviour of Elvis and his friends. The relationship, however, was also one of guarded mutual affection, based on lengthy conversations in which neither woman fully understood what the other one was saying. Minnie May did not go out often, making the house her kingdom, although she sometimes went shopping with Mrs. Piper to buy food for Elvis. When Mrs. Piper couldn't go with her, she would give Minnie May a list in German. Minnie May prepared the food for Elvis and the family, trying to learn German dishes, particularly chocolate cake. When Mrs. Piper tasted the food, she tasted it with her finger, and this only caused more friction between her and Minnie May. They argued how food should be prepared. They argued over the organisation of the kitchen, all without the benefit of a common language. There was so much friction that in fact Minnie May once attacked Mrs. Piper with a broom. Mrs. Piper refused to spend money on the maintenance of the house. It was not in very good condition. What particularly irked Elvis and his entourage was the state of the garden. When they played badminton there, which they did a lot, they often lost the shuttlecock, as the grass was too long. Mrs. Piper knew Elvis was rich, and that it was good to have him in the house. Well aware of the problems Elvis had encountered while searching for a house to rent and exploiting a situation which was working totally to her advantage, she was quite happy to sit back and let the money roll in. Indeed, she even made some extra cash by selling off some of Elvis's many personal belongings, particularly clothes, to visiting fans, right up until the day he left in 1960. Privacy was important to Elvis. When his mother Gladys died, and as his celebrity status in the US grew, it became impossible for him to walk down the street without being mobbed by fans. The barriers he had started to build around him in the USA were particularly relaxed in Bad Nauheim. Once the initial novelty of having a famous rock and roll star in their midst had worn off, Elvis was able to move quite freely through the streets of the town, having to deal only with the occasional nervous teenage autograph hunter. In short, Elvis found Bad Nauheim refreshingly relaxing. Although fans continued to gather outside his house, he grew fonder of the Germans as he settled into his new surroundings. He enjoyed himself with the local youth. He engaged in friendly firework fights, wrestled or played football with them together with his fellow GIs on the waste ground near his house. Elvis's manager, Tom Parker, urgently needed publicity photos of Elvis in uniform. They decided to get some pictures in Bad Nauheim. This resulted in photos with a shepherd dog in the park, with horses in front of the Church of Thanks, the pedestrian bridge behind the Park Hotel, Park Street near the bridge, and the famous archway. The photo shoot took place February 7, 1959. On March 26, 1959, Vernon had a car accident. The accident occurred when Vernon was driving Elizabeth Stefaniak back to Bad Nauheim after a shopping trip to Frankfurt. On the Frankfurt Castle Highway, Vernon accelerated to pass the car in front of him, just as that car also started pulling out. Vernon then hit the brakes too hard, causing the Mercedes to go into a skid roll and roll over a few times and fly across the oncoming lanes, finally crashing into a tree at the far side of the highway. The Mercedes was a terrible mess, a total write-off, along with the groceries, including broken eggs spilled all over the rear seat. Vernon had a few bruises, but was otherwise unhurt. Elizabeth, on the other hand, did not get off so lightly. Temporarily paralysed and thinking she had broken her back, she was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, while Vernon remained with the wrecked car. The damage to the car amounts to 15,000 German marks, which is roughly $8,500 US, which leads to fierce clashes between father and son. The next day, March 27, Elvis had his over-the-hump party, which meant he was basically more than halfway to his army time in Germany. Red West returned to the USA shortly after. Red's abrupt departure from Germany can only really be explained by his increasingly disgraceful behaviour. As far as Elvis was concerned, Red's presence in Germany was no longer required. Once the troublesome Red West was out of the way, Elvis was able to relax. On April 2, 1958, Ray Barracks in Friedberg was open for the public, and people flocked in just to see Elvis. The army managed to make the most of the event by putting Elvis in charge of the football competitions. This involved picking the teams, acting as official host, and explaining the game to many visitors. Vernon Presley took advantage of the event too, and visited Elvis with Elizabeth Stefaniak. Elvis demonstrated military weapons and equipment, such as rocket launchers and a tank. On June 1, 1959, Elvis was promoted to Specialist 4th Class equivalent of Corporal, which included a raise of $22.93. Taking his pay from $99.37 to $122.30 a month. But Elvis's celebration was cut short 2 days later. He ended up in the Army's 97th Hospital in Frankfurt, being treated for tonsillitis and a throat infection, and remained there until the 9th of June. During his hospitalisation, Elvis received an unexpected shock from his father. Vernon had been having an affair with Davinda D. Stanley, a petite blonde, blue-eyed mother of 3 children, and wife to Bill Stanley, a non-commissioned officer stationed at Elvis's base in Friedberg. The couple had met at the Hotel Grunwald when Dee, originally from Tennessee, called Elvis to ask him for supper. Elvis responded by inviting her to the hotel for supper instead. And then he let Vernon stand in for him, as he really didn't want to meet up with her. Instantly attracted to the vivacious Dee, Vernon was soon visiting the Stanleys at their home. He then became involved with Dee behind her husband's back, and they started planning to marry. The affair caused a scandal in Bad Nauheim. One witness, Mrs. Fleur, guessed that something was going on when she saw Vernon more than once in the park in Bad Nauheim, walking hand in hand with a mysterious blonde lady. As Mrs. Flower said, Vernon already had a reputation with the locals as a hard-drinking womanizer. Elvis's father caused him quite a few problems, she said, and suggested that he was quick to exploit his son's fame to his own benefit. According to a report on Vernon, usually after a few drinks of whiskey, he himself signed autographs and let himself be photographed with girls. He also had a soft spot for ladies. Seeing Vernon with his mysterious blonde, Mrs. Fuller curiously wanted to find out what was going on, and she investigated the matter, soon learning that the lady D. Stanley was an American woman. She was married and the mother of 3 healthy sons. When word of this liaison spread around the town, the elderly locals were horrified. On June 12th, Elvis reserved a train compartment and travels from Frankfurt to Munich with Charlie Hodge, Rex Mansfield and Lamar Fike. They stayed in the hotel Bayrichter. Elvis and his friends go to the Moulin Rouge every evening until the early hours of the morning in a reserved booth. They were on their way to board the train for Paris when they found that Elvis's blue dress uniform was still at the hotel. The driver turned around and the uniform was packed into the car. However, because of this mishap, Elvis and his friends missed the train to Paris. Elvis offered to give the driver $100 if he managed to catch up with the train before its next stop at Augsburg. The driver made it, and they all could finally sit back and enjoy the train ride to Paris. On June 16, 1959, Elvis with his friends arrived in Paris. It was still dark outside when they arrived. Freddie Beanstalk, the manager at Hill and Range Music and in charge of finding new songs for Elvis, was waiting for him at the station. Together with his cousin, Jean Orbeck, Freddie Beanstalk reserved a suite at the Prince de Gales Hotel at 33 George Fifth Avenue near the Arc de Triomphe. Elvis and his friends had only one thing on their mind after unpacking: to take a walk in Paris without being recognised, walking on one of the world's most beautiful avenues, and he was assured that he could walk there in peace. Late at night, Elvis, with his friends, enjoyed the nightlife in Paris the same way as he did Munich. The Moulin Rouge, Folies Bergères, the Carousel, Lido de Paris, etc. Elvis and his friends stayed in Paris until 27th of June. They enjoyed the days and nights. Elvis rented a Cadillac for the price of $800 for the drive back and arrived before midnight at the Ray Barracks in Freiburg. On Tuesday, 7th of July 1959, Freiburger citizens observed Elvis during his lunch break with screeching tyres, stopping in front of the business of Seed Hemmen at Kaiser Street, 93 to 95. A newspaper report reads, "With elegant momentum, the GI jumps out of his BMW and disappears in the shop that sells garden supplies. A few minutes later, Elvis tows a motorised mower down the front steps of the store and throws it on the back seat of his car. No one watching the scene can figure out what Elvis is doing with the lawnmower. But if you know the wilderness behind the house where he lives, you will know what the owner, Miss Piper, calls lawn must be mowed before Elvis can play football." So the rock and roll singer gives his German landlady a lawnmower as a present. The situation with Vernon and Dee came to a head when Elvis was back from Paris. He was visited by Vernon and Dee, who nervously were seeking his permission to marry as soon as Dee's divorce was finalised. Though he had often complained bitterly to his friends about the affair, Elvis said yes. He learned from Elizabeth Stefaniak that Vernon had moved Dee temporarily into his house at Growth Street 14 without telling Elvis about it. The final blow came when Elvis said he wanted to move Dee and her 3 sons into Graceland, the home that Elvis saw as the home of his mother. Though Elvis generally liked Dee, he would never fully forgive his father for marrying her. Hiding his resentment, he said he was delighted and that he would add another room onto Graceland for them. Vernon was relieved, but Elvis nurtured secret resentment. feeling exploited and shocked that his father had betrayed Gladys so soon after her death. This, as with so many other events in his life, caused Elvis to withdraw even more into himself, feeding his feelings of insecurity. His charm was still there, but it was no longer natural. Often, it was calculated. Elvis was changing. So there we go. So Gladys still has not been gone all that long, and Elvis is just can't get over it. Her death deeply affected him, and I believe it did so for the rest of his life. He was never ever the same after Gladys passed away. And at the moment it seems like every little thing is just annoying him. His father being with Dee, the lawns being too big at the back, so he buys Miss Piper a lawnmower, as if to say, here, mow the lawn. His personality just seemed to be changing. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below. And I hope you all have a good week. And we'll see you next week. Bye.